Exploring Healthier Masculinity Within Business, a monthly call for executive and senior leaders within industry who too rarely have a space to stop, to breathe, to take off the weight of being a leader of teams and organizations. Taking place on the first Monday of every month. Email gary.turner@radicality.co.uk. Hello. Welcome back to the next episode of In the Business of Healthy Masculinity, whatever that title means to you. We're always interested to hear. But I am going to be bringing on stage very shortly an amazing human being. Go check out her website, debbiedanon.com. Actually, I'm going to bring you on now, Debbie, rather than try and build it up. Hello. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Hello. I'm really well, thank you, Gary. I'm so happy to be here with you today.
Oh, well, thank you for joining me again. It's been a while, but since we had you on a platform. But I wanted to start today with, I suppose, being a bit vulnerable and a bit real, because we literally had a conversation not more than 5 minutes ago as we were recording this, and sort of went, where do we want to go today? How do we want to explore? You know, what matters to us in the moment? And we both sort of agreed, why don't we start there and show people that everything doesn't have to be prescribed to a T for us to do or be together, right? And I thought it was quite an interesting start. I'm wondering what popped up.
And
yeah, what made you go on, Gary? Yeah, I agree.
Well, two things really. One is that I've just come back from parental leave from having my second child, and I'm learning that sometimes preparation is like a comfort blanket that you don't need, and that sometimes it's all there and you've just got to trust that it's available. So that's one part of it, and the other part of it is knowing you and me, Gary, and the friendship and co-conspiratorship that we've woven over the last couple of years. It really strikes me, it's 3 years now, coming up 3 years in July it will be, and it really strikes me that we can, I guess, model what it's like to come as ourselves, without the notes, without the cue cards, but with a trust that the conversation will unfold as it needs to, and whatever's said will be said, and whatever's unsaid, we can live with that, and we can get complete with it at the end. So yeah, I think it's about how I might not be, there's something about enablement, that you enable me to feel like being not even unprepared, but being kind of spontaneous and present will be welcome, rather than expecting me to kind of hit off 17 points in 30 minutes.
Oh my God. If anybody's watching or listening to us right now, yes, you are thinking about the job that you probably do, where you have to have 19 different points and there's an agenda of 30 minutes. And if you don't hit it, you've failed. Like you, not the job, not the meeting, you have failed. And I think this is what we're trying to counter with this platform, right, Debbie, in many ways. And I know your work with Rebel Leadership. Again, do check out Debbie's website, debbiedanon.com. Do also go and follow and connect with Debbie on LinkedIn. It's very, very... What I want to also say thank you to you for, actually, as we get going today. I want people to subscribe to your newsletter, Debbie, because you've got a real way with words. Like you paint a picture with words like few I know, actually. And I've just wanted, as we get going, maybe you can just give a bit more of an overview for the listener who maybe hasn't heard of you before or know about your work. And I want you to weave in with that. Where does this sort of penchant for writing come from? So who's Debbie today in the world, and where does that amazing writing come from?
Thank you, Gary. Well, I guess, I've always written. I used to keep a diary, and it goes into several volumes that take up a shelf in my parents' house.
Wow.
Still, since I was about 13. And I can't pretend that all of it was, literary gold, but it did get me in the practice. Right, I used to copy down text messages that people had sent me, kind of analyzing them, and annotating them, and I don't know, I just had writing practices in my repertoire from when I was quite young, and I've always been interested in the art of the word as well, so how words are used in art, and I remember being really struck, and I'm from a Jewish heritage, and one of the things I found so powerful is how the Torah is written on parchment in black ink, And the words that are there are the black ink, and the space is where we can breathe our own interpretation into it. So I think that's really when I write poetry, I write kind of invitations, kind of coaching invitations to people. I write some quite maybe sometimes very organizational and kind of very pithy questions for people to ask themselves about kind of who they're being in their work and their life, but sometimes more kind of poetic and metaphorical questions about kind of what narrative people are living in at the moment. I guess for me, it's like I offer the words, and then the words have space between them for people to see themselves. And sometimes I'm really surprised by the sentence that just sort of flowed out of me and I didn't give much thought to, but someone will come back to me and say, that was the sentence that really blew my mind and just spoke to me in this moment. And I guess I read a lot. I love reading fantasy and science fiction. I just finished a beautiful book, which is really worth a read. I don't know, folks who enjoy kind of fantasy and science fiction, that's great. But people who maybe haven't tried it before, or who have kind of a bit of a thing against it, I actually think it has a lot to reveal to us about our state of things now. Not just in terms of, oh gosh, that person wrote about this years ago and it's happening now, but it really can open up a sense of possibility, and also of kind of restriction, like what restrictions are we going to see in the future, and how might I respond to that, and I love Octavia Butler's work, Black Afrofuturist writer, and I only recently discovered what I am imagining is kind of a Jewish counterpart for Octavia Butler, called Marge Piercy. She wrote a book in 1991 called He, She, and It, which I just completed. Now I just finished reading, and it's about AI. It's about climate collapse. It's about people spending days on end connected to the net, which didn't kind of exist in the way that we know it now. It's very prescient, but it also speaks to history. It talks about the golem, which was it was a clay kind of being that was that there's a myth about it in Jewish tradition, that the Maharal, who was a rabbi of Prague, of the ghetto in Prague, which experienced enormous oppression, enormous violence, Jews being framed for murders. They would dump dead bodies inside the ghetto and then frame them for murder, all this sort of stuff. And the women would routinely get assaulted and all these things. There's a tale that the Maharal bewitched this, or kind of invoked the name of God to come to bring alive this clay man who then proceeded to protect the ghetto and protect people, and it became this kind of totem of what happens when we pray to God for protection, but how do we make that solid? How do we have something that really who will come to our rescue? And it weaves together the past and the future in this way, which I found really powerful, and I'm finding that Marge Piercy's ideas and words are kind of leaking into the way that I write as well. So I think whether I read poetry, whether I read a lot of leadership and development books. I've got the wonderful Permission to Speak by Samara Bay. I was just checking out something that I knew that she'd written. I've got all the pages turned down. She's a dear friend of mine based in LA. So I think there's a huge wealth of ideas out there, and sometimes by restricting ourselves to it has to be leadership development versus it has to be how do humans cope and express themselves and try different ways of surviving and thriving in different environments. That really speaks to me. I don't know if that answers the question, but
it answers it, and it brings so much of you to life as to like who is Debbie in the world at the moment as well, which is another part of my question. Because what you've just spoke to, again, for me, Debbie, and I'd love to explore this a bit with you, through the work that you do with Rebel Leadership and elsewhere, that permission to speak bit is huge, because what I'm seeing and what I'm struggling with, honestly, is I'm continuing to practice, and it is a practice. I make mistakes, finding my voice, trying to center the voice of those most harmed and oppressed, whilst trying to say, look, it's not our fault. We've been conditioned in this system. We've been brought up in it over generations. But it is incredible. I understand why, but it is incredible the level of willful blindness right now within and outside of businesses, i.e. people know what's going on. We can understand it. It is horrendous in many ways, in many quarters. But there's almost just paralysis. There's almost and like I say, I have a level of empathy, but I also wonder what it's going to take for us en masse, and I'm talking particularly actually men, because for throughout history we've seen actually it tends to be women of all denomination, black, brown, disabled, Jewish women, who tend to be the ones that are at the front of the lighting the fires and trying to change things. And we sort of come in, I'm not degrading men, but like we tend to not be on the forefront of change that often. We tend to be the ones starting wars rather than trying to stop them, right? And I'm just wondering what invitation or curiosity you may have on what I've just shared around this sort of weird moment we're in, and maybe how that book you've just read speaks to that somehow, and what it may tell us about this moment.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. Maybe I'll go at it in this case through the lens of the kind of coaching that I do. So rebel leadership is the practice that's been born from my experience, bringing together integral coaching, which is a very holistic school of coaching, which looks at the whole human. We've only got one body, one brain, one being, even though we compartmentalize quite well as humans in late stage capitalism, right? But there's a way in which the integral coaching method, I think, helps us to rehome all the parts that got cut out. So whether it's the emotions that we cannot speak, for women, often it's anger or frustration, rage, that's been sort of socialized out of us or told that it's not welcome. For many men in our culture, it's sadness, it's confusion, it's not knowing what to do. It's like desperately uncomfortable. And it might also be experiences that have been, you've kind of shut it out. You've had a bad experience with something, you've shut it out, and you said that's never for me again. Or it might be skills and strengths that you've not invested in, so they've kind of atrophied or they haven't had the chance to really bloom. So I brought together for Rebel Leadership this integral coaching with a really deep appreciation for justice frameworks, for what it means to understand power in the world and how it is abused, and also the opportunities for it to be redistributed and kindled in healthy ways. And I say this, my framework talks about rebel authenticity, rebel balance, and rebel courage, all of which are needed for, to kindle that permission to speak, right? To speak authentically rather than from our conditioning, which takes a lot of unlearning. To be in a balanced state, in a grounded state, rather than in this kind of way that the world tends to knock us sideways all the time. And how can we reground and recenter when we've been thrown off balance? And also, how can we resource ourselves appropriately, right? Not be in kind of constant burnout grind. Setting boundaries to protect our own energy, making requests of others to borrow from their energy by consent, right? It's kind of quite the opposite from like demanding that people do things from us, right? It's going, well, how do we, this is the task at hand, how do we marshal all our energies together? And then rebel courage, which is really about doing the right thing when it's a hard thing. And maybe this is something that you're speaking to with your question, Gary, which is how do we get to that place where we're willing to see our self-interest as bound up with other self-interests, even if it's not going to affect us in quite the same way. And I would come at it slightly maybe differently than kind of, women have always been at the front and men have always been trailing behind. I would instead say, I wonder whether, by socialization, the way we've been socialized, this is just a hypothesis, but let's tease it out. It can be an idea in wet clay, as I like to say. It can be kind of reshaped if it's not quite right. But I wonder whether women are more prone to self-reflection and basically having to mold themselves into ways of being, having to code switch, and that goes for obviously folks of color or for other marginalized folks as well, and having to really reflect on how they're appearing. And I think it could be that many of us are more attuned to openings, which are the prerequisite for coaching. There needs to be an opening in your structure of interpretation, in your way of understanding the world, where you go, oh crap, like, excuse my French, that's like what worked for me until now is not what's going to work anymore. None of my strategies, none of my ways of being that normally I would turn to are working anymore. And I think for a lot of women, not all, but I think a lot will turn and will ask for help. And that comes sometimes from a kind of being their self-esteem being ground down, but it also comes from a sense of like that sense of interdependence and collective and being like, maybe someone else knows, and maybe that's kind of, there needs to be an investment in their inner knowing and their inner intuition. But equally, for many men, when you don't know something, that's when turn to ChatGPT, turn somewhere that doesn't involve exposing yourself to there can be a hardening around the opening rather than a softening, right? Like of like, I can't let this change me. Then that might say that I'm not strong enough, or I'm not X enough, right? I'm not blah enough. So there's got to be, I think for men to act, I guess for masculinity to be transformed, to be healthy, there needs to be openings, and folks need to, and I say folks because patriarchy has no gender. I see this in women who've internalized unhealthy masculinity as a standard. Folks need to perhaps recognize openings to go, I'm suddenly seeing something, like the things that I used to do aren't working anymore. Like, I'm suddenly in this new role, or someone in my team has gone off sick and like is incredibly ill, and that like brings up fear of death for me, all sorts of stuff, right? Or it might be just that I've got a shit ton to do, and however much I try to do, I can't do it all. Or it might be something like, I've got someone on my team who really expresses their emotions, and it absolutely triggers me to be like, what do I do with all these emotions? Right? It could be all these things, but it's about recognizing that as an opening, not as at the end of a conversation, or a perennial question mark, but as a ... of like, where do I go from here? What help is available to me? Who has been here before? We don't have that culture of elders anymore. And sounds like a very trite thing to say, that everyone always says, we don't have elders anymore. But it's true. We don't have that kind of honoring and blessing that elders and youngers do in more, I guess, communities where they have traditions of that. Capitalism has kind of done away with that, because if you can buy something, so much the better. So yeah, I guess what I want to say about this, Gary, is how might we invite folks in, and the work that you're doing, I know, is doing this in spades, is to go, what if the next breakdown that you experience in your leadership, in your life, in your family world, is an opportunity to step into an even bigger and even more wise, compassionate, and capable version of yourself? Who doesn't want to be that? Right? And I don't think it is. What do I want to say about this? I guess I want to caveat that with, there's a place for accountability, right? We've talked in many times, including today, about, opportunity when someone does something that is such an abuse of their positional or identity-based power, that there is no, nicey about it. And we have to be like, hello, this is like not okay. But also, people don't grow in a place of shame. So it's a tightrope, really, to wonder about that. That sometimes, it's not so much growth as compliance that you need from people to like stop doing harmful things. But if we really want people to grow, it has to be from a place of an opening that they've identified as in their self-interest, and maybe a wider idea of their self-interest than they perhaps thought before, to step through that door.
So honestly, Debbie, thank you for sharing that. And I really felt viscerally that openings piece, because whilst my comment may sound a little bit judgy, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, around sort of us men maybe not being as much at the forefront, I think what you spoke to really powerfully for me is my own experience, right? And my own experience was being bullied as a kid, not having a safe place to go and talk about it and express it. So what did we do as men under patriarchy? we stuff it down, and all the dysfunction that follows that. So I really empathize, and I think that's why it's so important that this platform hosts a mix of genders, however people identify, a mix of perspectives. Because what I was really conscious of, Debbie, is I didn't want it to be all men, all women, all however someone identifies, and then it push a certain narrative. The whole point of this platform is to say what is possible. And what is possible for me is through those openings. And that's really, really hit me hard, because I'm sort of sitting here in this moment now thinking and feeling. I had an experience this morning. We had a chat about it, right? In a certain work context. I'm just wondering, to what extent, if that team culture and those relationalities, plural, that were in that space together, if there was a shared belief in growth and better, Any one of those people, including myself, could have put their hand up in that meeting and said, no, we do not do that here. We don't talk down to people. We don't talk over people. We don't abuse other people, tell them they're less than publicly. But because there's such a disconnection, I see, particularly in workplaces, it's so atomized into the job spec, into you're accountable for this bit and it's not connected to anybody else. You just do your bit. I wonder to what extent that restricts the openings. And how do we prize open? How do we make space together, individually, first of all, but also collectively? And I wonder how your work helps with this. How do we prize open the space, I guess, is the question I'm holding together.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think cultures that have developed around with, every culture has a function or has several functions. And sometimes that function is to, an enabled team culture is that the function of it is to enable, that old chestnut, but psychological safety, which means the ability to fail and iterate and experiment and work things out without sort of feeling like you're on the block. Also that sense of, a positive culture can function to, allow everyone to bring their strengths to the table, and for that kind of how we're going to divide the work or make things happen. There also has to be accountability, and I always say integrity is the foundation of workability, i.e. when people say that they will do something, if one person doesn't do it, and particularly a person in power, it actually kind of breaks the fundamental agreement of I'll do what I said I'll do. And if that's not addressed, then that becomes the culture, right? It's like, I can say whatever I want in the meeting, but will I do it? So I guess we could ask the question: what functions is a dysfunctional culture fulfilling? Which is, does it keep certain people empowered and other people less empowered? Does it hoard certain relationships or responsibilities with certain people? We can talk about what the function of it is. And I think, this is where I think, when I do facilitated teamwork, we talk about 3 kinds of conversations. Comes from the practice of integral coaching, which I think is really helpful, but it all depends on people being coachable. So I will make an assessment in a group session of like whether there's, I would say, like net coachability in the room. Like, do I think even if there's some people who resist, do I think that there's net willingness to go somewhere? Is there enough of a sense of why, what the purpose is of me saying this, not just to be a pain in the ass, but to say, hey, this sounds like this might be getting in the way of you achieving your mission. I work with social, organizations driving social change, and everyone's there mostly because they care about the mission. So when it's like, actually, this might be getting in the way. But I guess the 3, assuming there's net coachability in the room, there's these 3 conversations that we can kind of draw attention to. We spend most of our time in corporate, in organizations at the level of action. Can you do this? Can you get me this by next Tuesday? Let's go. You didn't give me this yet. Can I have it, please? Da, 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 da. Right? Should we meet next Tuesday? And that's great, but you can't resolve breakdowns in action at the level of action. There's 2 layers beneath that. The next layer down is possibility, which is, are we aligned in the direction we're going in? Like, I said next Tuesday, you thought I meant next Tuesday, like diversion of possibility, or actually you thought that it needed to be in PowerPoint, but I didn't tell you that what I wanted was a 2-page Word report, or even more fundamental, I thought that we were genuinely going to consult those young people about the way this program is going to be created, but it sounds like you've made a decision that you want to kind of participation wash it and just do what you wanted to do anyway. Right? Parting of the ways of the possibility. So there needs to be a return to, I just want to check, like, I thought my assumption was that this is where we were going. Is that right for you? And then if that also breaks down, there's one level below that, which is relationship, conversations for relationship. And this isn't, do they like me? Do I like them? Do we get along? Can we have a nice drink in the pub? It isn't also, what can I get away with this person, or what can I get from them? It's not transactional in that way. A real conversation for a relationship is about listening to the person, paying attention to each other and going, okay, is there trust here? And is there workability here? And also, what are our common CICs, concerns, interests, and commitments? What are the things that we share? It might be that our CICs are quite limited. It might just be like, we are both working for the same company and we both have an interest in getting paid. So let's just do this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that is enough room to go to possibility and then to action. Maybe. But quite often, if we actually start to have a conversation for a relationship with someone, we realize, oh, you're actually seeking to go for promotion in the next year. I actually had no idea about that. Like, and actually I'm similarly thinking about, what my role might look like. And then you find commonality and you're like, okay, so we're both on a bit of a growth journey. We're both kind of, and how might we support each other with that? Or, how might we think about really making our mark with this project with that? So what I would say when it comes to healthy masculinities, Gary, is, where for with that stuffing down of emotion or that stuffing down of vulnerability, where's the willingness to go down to possibility or relationship, which are less comfortable? The deeper you go, the less comfortable it gets, for sure. It's like, you're swimming on the surface of the lake. It's all very comfortable, but what's beneath feels very murky and kind of unknown. And yet, bobbing around on the surface, it's only by going to the depths that you can really push up with some force to the surface, right? So I wonder whether, when you talk about these dysfunctional cultures, there is a bypassing of relationship and there is a bypassing of shared strategy and possibility, because those will bring out more discomfort, more vulnerability than folks can tolerate.
That's so helpful. And I'm already marginally looking at the clock, Debbie, going, Jesus, I feel like we just got going. Like, where's the other 9.5 hours? What's super interesting, actually, you mentioned eldership earlier. Today's conversation with the amazing Zaina May is on exactly this topic.
Oh, so good. So good.
It's so intriguing to me because I think it really speaks to everything you've shared as well. In many ways, we weave all this together. It's like power, as in positional power, is nowhere near as helpful as inner and collective power when it's distributed well and intentionally and in a healthy way, to use your language, right? And as I chatted with Zaina a couple of weeks ago, she was sharing really powerfully that, we the royal we could assume that eldering's to do with age, that you get, as you get older, you become wiser, etc. Which of course it isn't. Becoming an elder just means that you are managing those rites of passage, as you were so beautifully pointed to earlier on. So I just want to thank you, Debbie, for this conversation, because what it's done for me has really helped piece me back together again today, honestly. And it's a reminder that no matter how much work we're doing, I've done a lot over the last decade, every single day there's an opportunity to keep reintegrating. I don't know if you'd sort of add, build, or challenge on that, but I feel like, I feel in a pretty good place. But even coming into our call today, I'd had an experience that dysregulated, disintegrated me for a period of time. And because of this conversation, I'm going to go back into the world after it, reintegrated again.
Yeah. If I might ask you, maybe this can be our final word, Gary. Is there an opening or a door that you can see for yourself at the end of this conversation?
Many actually. And it's really interesting. There is a mixture of doors and openings. One of those openings being, to what extent do I want to have relationship at that bottom level with certain people?
Yeah.
Where there's a lot of investment, whether it be paid or otherwise. So I think there's a real powerful, reflective question there around what sort of openings make sense in the current, going forward. And I think the other one as well is just really the possibility, and you spoke about that a lot in this conversation, just knowing we've already got so much of what we think we need, we've already got so much of already. Yeah. And I think that reminder, that clarity, because again, it's something, colonial systems, patriarchal systems educate us, condition us to believe that we need. everything outside of us, right, before we can even start to feel whole or start to feel worthy, etc. So they're the two main things. What relationships do I want to keep openings with, or which ones are maybe done, maybe which ones need to be closed, and also that piece, that reintegration piece. Yeah, lots, Debbie, lots. How about you? Is there anything that you've been reminded of or provoked to take into the rest of your day after our conversation today?
Yeah, just that you put it beautifully, Gary, that I see it as like the pyramid of resource, like all these instances of like being discombobulated, dysregulated, chucked off course, like feeling all kinds of feelings, like push us to the top of the pyramid where there's less resource, right? We think we're building resource, we're doing really well, and then or like we'll see something on the news and it will completely floor us and we're back at this level of resource. And just the way that you've grounded yourself, and also just the vulnerability with which you shared with me, and you brought it into this conversation, without getting into the details of it, but there's something so I don't know, so freaking awesome about being human, that we can, with co-conspirators who want us to win, with right relationship, with enough common interest, commitment, and concern, interest, and commitment, that basis, and with enough imagination for possibility, we really can recenter ourselves. And I'm really touched by also what you said about I guess this eldering of like, maybe we need to rethink what that is. I think maybe this is about being right-sized, which I talk a lot about, which is in British culture, we talk a lot, we try to play ourselves down as humility as being smaller, but in the Jewish tradition, humility is not being too big, but also not being too small, because if you're playing too small, then you are depriving the world of your gifts by prioritizing your fear. So my invitation to you is to find your right size, the rightful size, in your response to these questions and these wonderings that you're having.
Wow. Well, for anyone that's listening or watching, you can see why I'm really grateful to have Debbie Danon in my world. Check out her website. Popped it up a few times. If you're listening again, you got this far. Thank you for joining Debbie and I. And I just want to leave you with the last word, really, Debbie. What's your final sort of invitation or reflection for anyone that might have got this far, watched or listened to us today? Apart from, of course, please do connect and get in contact, sign up to the newsletter, because it really is powerful.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd love to hear from you. If you heard this and something spoke to you, if you hear an opening calling, please do get in touch. I think maybe it's what I always say, and why people say, why rebel leadership? I was the girl who always did her homework on time. Like, I didn't see myself as, I was mates with my teachers. I was not the rebel. But there came a point in life where I really looked around and I was like, well, the world is deliberately set up to inhibit flourishing. Like, there are people who have power who are absolutely not willing to give that up, or to flex it in directions which would actually enable flourishing. And the systems that we're navigating are not that. So if we're going to flourish, and if we're going to create sort of alternative realities of flourishing, then we're going to have to be rebels about it. But the rebellion has to start in here. It can't be performed until we are transformed. Maybe that's where I'll leave it.
Nothing more to add to that. Thank you, Debbie. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Take care for now.
Bye.
Cheers.